Now I'd like to introduce Lynne Moggach. Lynne is a social worker with over 35 years of experience in the field of adoption from out-of-home care in the UK and in Australia. And Lynne has worked for Barnardo's Australia's Open Adoption Program since 1986 as both a practitioner and manager, and is currently part of the team conducting unique research into the outcomes of open adoption for those children who've been adopted through Barnardo since 1987. Lynne is speaking to us today about supporting families through the adoption journey.
Thanks, Amy. And that was a nice segue into what Judy was saying about the lack of Australian research into the outcomes of open adoption. Just very, very quickly, our research study is looking at children who were adopted through Barnardo's from out-of-home care from 1987 through to 2013. And we're doing that through analysis of data, through online questionnaires and qualitative interviews. And much of the focus of that research is on what has happened to adoption throughout that period of time, and also looking at communicative openness. So it's very much one of the key areas that we're looking at. There's maybe some people here who don't know who we are. Barnardo's became an adoption agency in 1985. And that was really to address the permanency needs of children in out-of-home care. Our focus was originally on primary school-aged children, but over the years that has extended, and we now accept referrals of children aged 0 to 8 years. But right from 1985, we have had a focus on openness in adoption. So every child who has been adopted through our program has had arrangements for direct and indirect contact with birth family members, and that was long before the Adoption 2000 Act. Oops, I've lost my mouse. So if we look at the children who are referred to our program, they've all had a history of abuse or neglect, including in utero, through the impact on the fetus of drugs and alcohol or domestic violence. Or for children who have not experienced that, they are seen to be at risk of abuse. We know also that they will have an experience of loss and separation from parents, and Beth particularly spoke about this, and at some stage in their life will demonstrate and display the impact of that grief, of that trauma, of that loss. So they often will come with behavioural difficulties, attachment difficulties, and may require additional supports in the terms of counselling, occupational therapy, speech therapy. We also have placed quite a few large sibling groups, and I recognised a few of the initials on Judy's slides, thinking, yes, they went through our program. So we have had groups of, I think in one 3-month period, we had 3 sibling groups of 3 who went through the Supreme Court for adoption. With our adoptive parents, we have single people coming into the program, people in relationships who have been in a relationship for at least 3 years. They do need to meet some general requirements of the adoption legislation, but we also have additional requirements for Barnardo's. For example, if we require people who want to care for children under the age of 5 to be non-smokers, because we know of the impact of cigarette smoke on developing lungs. And we do require a carer to be at home full-time for the first 6 months to help a child settle into that placement. So this topic is about how we support families through the process, and our support for our adoptive parents starts from the very, very first telephone inquiry and really transfers onto the information session when they're given more details about our process. And it's at that stage that we really start talking in earnest about open adoption, just exactly what it does mean, the importance of it, the benefits of it, what communicative openness is, so that it's part of that process from the beginning. We talk about what contact might look like, the frequency, who may be there. We also talk about the fears right at that very first information session, because we know that adoptive parents or prospective adoptive parents come to us with anxieties about contact. It's the first time maybe that they've actually been aware that contact will continue after adoption. And I was talking to a colleague this morning who said that even now there are a lot of people out there in the field, practitioners, who aren't aware of the concept of open adoption. So if we're not aware of it, people in the community who are coming forward to adopt aren't aware of that either. We look particularly at the fact that all of our carers who come forward are duly authorised carers, so they are going to be involved in contact from the very beginning of the placement. So that means they're authorised as carers, but also as prospective adoptive parents. So that whole process begins right at the very beginning. And they play such a critical role in providing that positive environment for a child where those communications, those conversations can occur, as well as in contact, because as Beth and I have discussed, most of our adoptive parents manage contact on their own after adoption. So we facilitate that process, we assist them in that. And again, it's the role of Bernardos in supporting them in those initial stages, particularly before we come to an application to the Supreme Court. And again, as Judy said, most of those children have been in placement for 3 to 5 years. And that's even for the very young children before the application is made. I should say that the average age, well, our age range at time of adoption has varied from 15 months to 33 years. Has been the oldest young person who's been adopted through our program. And we have had married people adopted. We have gone to the Supreme Court to assist with their adoption application. I guess in terms of looking at support for carers, the process of building that relationship with carers, which we see as being the key to the adoption outcomes, commences really when we're looking at the assessment and training process. And again, I'll mainly focus on the way we work with the openness and communicative openness and contact. So what we do is we have our own assessment process, so we don't use the step-by-step or shared stories, shared lives when we're looking at our training and assessment, but we do focus on key competencies, and these are on attitudes and connections, personal resilience, teamwork, which is really critical when we're looking at this, child-focused care and a safe environment for the child to grow. And we don't just mean physically safe. It needs to be emotionally safe, it needs to be nurturing, and it needs to acknowledge connections. We focus a lot on motivation and readiness to adopt, and that's right from the very beginning. Also acknowledging that these parents are going to be carers. So they're straddling that dual role of being a carer and having Bernardos and community services involved in their life, but also preparing them for autonomous parenting as an adoptive parent. Because of the importance of contact, one of the key things that we're looking for in the assessment is a true commitment to openness, not just a sort of a token commitment. So we've developed certain assessment tools for looking at the genuine commitment to openness and an understanding, a demonstrated understanding of the importance of communicative openness. Our initial training takes place over 3 days with 3 modules. And again, because we're looking at older children, we do reflect on the child's experience of trauma and helping applicants understand how this might impact on child's development and how they may need to adjust their parenting strategies to help look at that and to help assist children. We look at promoting resilience, particularly through those healing relationships that reparative parenting can provide, and on the development of relationships with birth family. And then we explore relationships within the home. If we look at the second day, which is the module particularly about relationships, we really focus in that day on openness and contact. and the role this plays in the development of the child's identity. So we identify the challenges that the child may face and give strategies for how to address that. But we also support them to understand what the perspectives of the birth parents might be like. What might they be thinking and feeling in these situations, to try and get them to walk in the shoes of that birth parent as well as in the shoes of the child. And that importance of having those relaxed, natural conversations at home in between visits. That really what happens between the visits is just as important as the contact visits themselves. And it really is the key to developing those relationships. So when we're looking at the relationships, we hope we give strategies for developing, for maintaining those relationships for different family members, because there are parents, there are siblings, there are grandparents, there are other extended families. And there may be, as we know, more than two sets of families. Often with sibling groups, we may have different fathers. There may be half siblings, there may be full siblings in different placements. We look at how you can maintain relationships over time, because it's not just in the beginning. If we're placing children mainly under the age of 8, we're looking at a lifetime of those relationships, continuing through into adulthood. And we look at the benefits and the potential challenges of contact. And I think it's really important to address the fears of contact as well, because we know particularly that applicants come to us knowing that these children have often been abused, have experienced rejection. Some of our children and some of the children in care have experienced quite horrific trauma. And to help our carers empathise and still acknowledge and respect the role of the birth parent, despite what has happened, can be quite a huge ask for them, particularly in those beginning stages. There is often quite some time between approval of applicants and placement of a child, and it's really important that we continue to support carers through that process. And that's done by our recruitment and support team, who maintain regular contact, and we have annual reviews just to check their changes in circumstances and what's happening. And because all of our placements are matched placements, carers need to be consulted with that placement, to be given detailed information about the child so that they can make an informed decision about whether that's the right placement for them, because we are asking them to take on a child for life. And then, of course, there's a transition from the child from the temporary placement into their permanent placement. And I think there's some information from Beth in your folders about planning for that transition phase. If we look at birth parents, we know that many birth families don't know about Barnardo's. They don't know what we do. And often their anger, their grief, their confusion about what's happened in the children's court may carry over into their relationship with us. But for other parents, they're able to see it as the start of a new relationship with an agency that hasn't been involved in the removal of their child. So it's a chance to make a clean start. But we make contact with the parents as soon as the child enters into the program, because we know that it's at that very early stages that we need to start developing the relationship. We think it's important that birth parents have written information about our program, our processes, their rights, and that we actually have those conversations about adoption, if that's the plan, from the very first time we meet a parent. And that can be a really hard conversation to have. Birth parents have told us that they don't like to hear what they're saying, but they actually appreciate the openness, the honesty, and the fact that we're not coming back 18 months or 2 years down the track and say, actually, we're planning on adoption. That they know that that's our plan from the beginning. And we need to acknowledge their fears and their emotions at the same time. In terms of supporting carers through that early process, we hope that with our assessment and training, they have got that good grounding for what is involved in caring for a child. We do regular visits, and they're weekly to start with, reduce over time to monthly, and the carers will always have their workers' home phone number, mobile number mainly these days, and can make contact at any time. We keep talking and going back to contact, acknowledging the fears, looking at the benefits, giving strategies to assist in making those contacts a positive and productive opportunity for everyone. Because it's important that children see both sets of their parents relating to each other. And that's why right from the very beginning our carers will be involved in contact. And that's regardless of whether the placement goes through to adoption or not. But with all our long-term placements, the carers are there as well as the birth family. And children can see that they're two sets of people that they care about can get on, hopefully, can respect each other, can respect each other's roles. And it's that respectful relationship that's really important. So working together, our aim is to have no surprises. That should be the aim of all good casework practice, I think. So carers are given information about birth parents are given information about our carers. And that, of course, is with consent of both parties. And it's information that starts off often being non-identifying at the beginning, but then will move to something. So we often have exchange of email addresses, mobile phones, and people maintain regular contact with each other. The first meeting between carers and birth parents we aim to have within the first month of placement, and certainly before our first review, which takes place 1 month after placement and before the first contact visit. We aim to keep families informed and to make sure that there's regular consultation, regular written information, regular discussions. Adoption work is complex, we all know that. We have set up adoption casework teams, mainly working with under 5-year-olds. And people think that might be quite cruisy, that it's not as difficult as working with older kids. But this is some of the most difficult and most complex work that we can do, because it involves really difficult conversations, and emotions never sit easily when you're talking about adoption. They tend to be very, very high. And we know that children will maintain some form of connection with their family going on into the future. So we know then that adoptive parents need to work with us and with the birth family to achieve that constructive contact. We really work hard as workers to build up that relationship, to build up that position where even if we don't necessarily expect carers and birth family to become friends, but to respect the role that each of them can play in the life of the child. We try and give everything in writing as much as possible, including processes, procedures, policies, timeframes, because I think it's important that as well as having those verbal discussions, people have something that they can refer to. And we do try and have continuity of case managers. As Amy said, I've been there for 32 years. I look around this audience and we've had people who've been at Bernardo's for 10, 15, 20 years. So we aim for continuity of workers. That's really important for all parties. Kids don't like having to tell their story over and over again. Birth parents don't like it. Carers don't like it. So we see that that's really important and integral to the work that we do. And the bottom word, respect, which just keeps coming up time and time again. Going on to Judy's thing about contested adoptions. Look, adoption proceedings, whether they're contested or not contested, are complex, they're emotional, they build up tension, even if people are consenting to it. It's not an easy process. They're unpredictable because you don't know what's going to happen. But particularly when you've got contested adoptions, and probably about 30% of our adoptions are contested. We had 43 adoption orders made last year, so you're looking at quite a few contested matters at court. We find that a number of parents don't actively contest the adoption even if they can't consent. Their opposition is not so much with the adoptive parents, but it's the whole notion of adoption, and they cannot give their child away, which is how they see it. And for them to think that their child believes that they did that. So what we hope is that contested adoptions have a real capacity and a real potential to negatively impact on relationships between the adults involved. So we try to minimise that at all times. It's important to state the reality. We never know whether an adoption order will be made. So for carers, it's a highly anxious time. But what we often find is that all the parties have similar fears. They may be coming at it from a different angle, but they have similar fears. They all give evidence in the Supreme Court, both the carers and the birth family. They're anxious about saying the wrong thing, of giving the wrong impression, of not looking good enough. Their fear for both is that they will lose the child. For the adoptive parents, that the child may be restored, that they will lose the legal role as a parent. And for birth family, of course, their fear is that they will lose their legal relationship with the child, that they will cease to legally become the child's parent. We need to ensure that birth parents therefore have all access to all information and to legal advice, and that our carers have access to information, have access to our solicitors, are prepared, that everyone's prepared to give evidence. I think those of us who have given evidence, no matter how many times you give evidence, it's a scary process. And we aren't emotionally involved. We don't have the emotional stakes that these people have. But people don't give you an easy time giving evidence. You know, you're not there, they're not there to praise you and what you're doing. They're there actually to find fault with what we're doing. So we really need to make sure that we support all parties through that process. And at Barnardo's, we actually work with the child, the carers, and the birth family. We don't have separate workers, as I know some agencies do. But what we hope is that if we've done that good groundwork, if we've done the good casework at the beginning, we've helped to build and maintain those relationships. We've had contested matters where birth parents and the prospective adoptive parents have sat next to each other in court, where they've cried together when orders have been made, where they've supported each other. It's been quite incredible to be part of some of those proceedings. I can remember one matter that was a contested adoption where the judge made the order, and it was for 3 children. The adoptive mother and the birth mother hugged each other in court. Everyone apart from the judge was crying. The associate was crying, the lawyers were crying. It was an incredible experience. But I think it was a really good demonstration. This actually doesn't need to be about relationships. The contested adoption is not necessarily about the relationships between the birth families and the adoptive families. It's about a process. And relationships can go on. Contact does continue after contested adoptions. And we have to build that up because we know it will continue. It goes beyond the courtroom. And we need to set the ground rules so that those relationships can be maintained into the future. And I think this goes back to what Beth has said, that it is about the relationships. This is what makes or breaks an adoption going forward into the future that is open, both in the communicative and the structural sense of the word. Thank you.